Welcome to In the Spotlight. I'm Abigail Pogrobin. Emily Tamkin is U.S. editor at the New Statesman, where she covers U.S. politics, society, and foreign policy. Before that, she covered foreign affairs as a staff writer at Foreign Policy and BuzzFeed News, and as a freelance reporter at places like Business Insider, Politico, and Prospect Magazine. She was awarded a Fulbright Fellowship, on which she studied Soviet legal dissidents in Bremen, Germany, and a Council on Foreign Relations International Affairs Fellowship, on which she researched the India-Russia relationship in New Delhi. Emily is the author of The Influence of Soros, Politics, Power, and the Struggle for an Open Society, which came out in 2020, and her new book, which we're going to talk about today, called Bad Jews, A History of Jewish American Politics, Identities, and Arguments. Emily lives in Washington, D.C. with her husband and her dog, Shiloh. Welcome to the broadcast, Emily Tamkin. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
So let's just start with how you describe your book. What do you tell people? What's your elevator pitch for Bad Jews?
Bad Jews is a roughly 100-year history of American Jews and Jewishness, with a focus on American Jewish identities and how we have contested and tried to figure out what it means to be Jewish in America. This book really comes out of my first book, which was about George Soros. And one of the things that people hear about, the people say when they're accused of having made an anti-Semitic attack against him is, well, I don't even think of him as Jewish because of his relationship to Israel or because he doesn't go to synagogue, which was upsetting to me. And I think probably for reasons about myself as much as about him. And also, I wrote that book during the Trump presidency when you had literally the most powerful person in America saying, well, I don't understand why are American Jews voting this way? Why aren't they more supportive of me? They don't love Israel enough, so on and so forth. And so I thought that it might be, I'm a journalist, I focus on the present, but I thought that it might be useful to put the present in this context and to look at how we've tried to shame one another or lift one another up as being Jewish in the right way or the wrong way, and how we've tried to make sense of our place as Jews and as Jews in this country.
And the term bad Jews is, you're saying that obviously, I mean, tongue in cheek is probably the wrong word, but there is something knowing about, in a sense, we're saying that about each other, right? I mean, Trump's obviously saying about us, but I think part of what you're describing is sort of a malaise is the way in which we label and judge and categorize each other within the Jewish community and decide whether someone is authentic enough, Jewish enough, really Jewish. When you say that you were bothered by the Soros comment, which, you still hear, it's not necessarily that you're aligned with Soros. Am I right? It's that you felt like it was just there was something in that accusation that was telling and problematic.
Exactly. Absolutely. I think my first book is quite critical of Soros in many ways, but what bothers me is this idea that it's for anybody to say that somebody else is Jewish in the right way or the wrong way. And I make this case throughout the book that there are various moments of Jewish history and certainly of American Jewish history where you can outline the same set of facts and make the case for why one person was the good Jew or the bad Jew or the other person was in these various situations. And I think what I try to encourage throughout the book is to instead to consider, rather than throwing the label Shanda de Goyim across the aisle at one another, to advocate for what's meaningful to us, what's compelling, what's intellectually and morally stimulating. To me, that is more productive than saying, well, I'm doing this the right way, I'm doing this the wrong way. And I think the other part of this is that it's not just that we throw it at each other, it's also something that we internalize. And I write at the beginning of the book that I really went back and forth on whether or not I was Jewish enough to write the book for a host of reasons that I go through in the introduction. And what I realized was that if anyone else said that about themselves, I wouldn't just say like, no, you're Jewish enough, but I would push back against that framing, that there's this idea that if you like fill out a check enough boxes on the sheet or whatever, that you're qualified to speak on being Jewish. Obviously, to write a book, one needs to have a certain amount of knowledge and have spent time on it. But the fact that I don't know, that I didn't have a bat mitzvah, the fact that my husband's not Jewish, does that mean that I can't speak about these things and think about them? And obviously, ultimately, I came down on no, it doesn't mean that.
Can you just go through a little bit more of your self-doubt just so people understand kind of how
Sure,
you're coming at this?
Yeah, so I mean, I had a very secular upbringing. My mother did not grow up Jewish, although she converted before I was born. I didn't have a bat mitzvah. As I say, my husband was not Jewish. I had not been to Israel before writing this book. So for all of these different reasons, like I didn't major in Jewish studies. I did Russian literature and culture, which has more Jewish. There's more overlap than one might think. But no, I think that for all of these reasons, I felt like maybe if somebody was, somebody should write this book, but should it be me? And basically what I came to believe is that process of self-doubt, that grappling with like, oh, am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? Actually served me really well. Because many of the people I spoke to, if I closed out an interview, I did like 150 interviews. And the last question I would ask is, when I say bad Jew, what comes to mind? And the most common answer I got by far, it was not close, was, oh, I think of myself, which is sort of funny, but it's also sort of sad that we carry this because I think, and sorry to sort of step on my soapbox here, but I think that one of the things that internalizing that label does is that it keeps people, certainly it kept me, from engaging with Jewishness as much or as fully as we might. One of the things that I did as a result of writing this book is join a synagogue because I was doing these interviews and people described being synagogue members. And I thought that sounded nice. And I realized that even though I didn't think of myself as the kind of person who went to synagogue, like, why couldn't I?
How has that been?
Yeah, it's been wonderful. It's been a really nice community. I found great comfort in being a part of it during the pandemic. And now that we're re-entering the world, it's been a stabilizing place and force. And I don't think that one needs to join a synagogue to be doing Jewish, but I do think it would have been a shame if my own internalized, self-doubt and my own these own tensions in my relationship to Jewishness had kept me from doing that.
You have these two kind of general categories, religious judgment and political judgment. And can you just kind of define both, because they're very recognizable to me, but I want to make sure everyone has a sense of kind of where the bad Jew label can stem from.
I think that throughout American Jewish history, we see it used in these two ways. The first is religious. Jewishness and Judaism, it's a lot of things, but it is a religious practice. And one of the ways that we see people either measuring others or measuring themselves is this idea that you're not observant enough. So you didn't go to synagogue enough, or you're not keeping kosher, or there's certain rules by which you are not abiding. I don't agree. I still don't think that it's right to say someone's a bad Jew because they're not meeting a certain level of religious observance. I think it's up for each of us to explore this for ourselves. But I do understand that because people have decided to make halakhic interpretation a certain part of their lives, like that, it's faith. What I have a lot less patience for, and this comes across through the book, is when people apply that to the political realm. So for example, in 2011, Ben Shapiro tweets, there have always been bad Jews, and in the United States, those bad Jews vote for Democrats. Or, when you have somebody in 2021, write an op-ed saying that, talking about declining or increased criticism for Israel among young people, and saying, well, yes, these people are halakhically Jewish, but they're married to people who aren't Jewish, and so they don't really care about it, so we don't need to consider their opinions. To me, that is, you're taking this sort of set of religious rules and applying them to this other realm in order to not just to prove your point, but to end the debate, to say that these aren't even worthy interlocutors because they're bad Jews or they're not really Jews at all. And to me, that really bothers me to see it weaponized in that way.
Why do you think Jews particularly need to do this to each other? We're such a tiny population. Why are we kind of self-slicing into kind of camps of good and bad? You're with us or against us. How do you analyze just the impulse even to kind of distinguish oneself against someone in our own religious family? Yeah,
I obviously think about this a lot. And actually somebody I interviewed for the book says that there are going to be enough people who aren't Jewish who say that we're bad. Maybe we don't need to do it to each other. But I think that, first of all, it is, as I say, it is a religion. It does come with a set of rules. And every group is defined by, to some extent, who is in, who is out. I think it becomes more I think I'll speak about the U.S. context. One of the tensions that we see throughout American Jewish history is how do you, as a minority, make yourself legible and understandable to the wider population? So you have, for a while, American Jews are just people who happen to pray differently. And then in the early 20th century, well, wait a minute, maybe we're ethnically distinct. And there's, how distinct do you want to be? At what point does that start sacrificing your security? And what looks Jewish to the outside? How can I make them understand that I'm Jewish while still remaining safe in this place? And I think that tension, that push and pull, and the lack of agreement on it and of what it means to be a religious, ethnic, cultural minority in this country plays into some of it too, or exacerbates maybe this in-group, out-group tension.
But you actually just raised the idea that difference is also kind of precious and important to Jews in the sense that we do things differently. And if you're the Orthodox, do dress differently, and they have very stringent decisions and parameters around their daily life. And that's intrinsic to their identity. So when difference is kind of inextricable from one's, like how one is Jewish in their lives and in the world, how do you kind of lift up or affirm that difference and also not maybe say that someone else's choices are not kind of authentic in one's mind? I mean, isn't there standards essentially?
Yeah, no, yes. And I think part of the, not difficulty, but part of the challenge is that those standards aren't those standards are different for a traditionally Orthodox person than they are for me, but we're both Jewish. And one of the things that I write about, or that I try to tackle in the book, is this paradox of pluralism, which is that if you, as I do, believe that that we should have liberal, and I don't mean in the political sense, I just mean that liberal in the sense that we all get to sort of define this for ourselves in this pluralistic space, and that we accept one another, even people we profoundly disagree with, as legitimate and as authentic and as exploring it in a way that's meaningful to them. That means that there will be people whose understanding and definition of Jewishness means that they will not be doing that. So as I say, I, like 60% of American Jews who got married in the last 10 years, am not married to a person who's Jewish. There are people for whom that is discrediting. And one of the things that I had to grapple with in the book is that I still need to accept that that's a legitimate, it's a legitimate Jewish position. Like, that is a way to be Jewish. I don't like it. I don't agree with it. But, who am I to say that person, am I going to say that person is bad, or you hear this often. I've been speaking about how Trump and company will say, well, those are the bad Jews. But there's a tendency on the progressive side, on the liberal side, to say, Stephen Miller, those aren't Jewish values. They are Jewish values. I can guarantee you that you can find some piece of Jewish text or Jewish history that one could point to justify that. So that's the paradox of the book. And I don't sort of end it saying that we should all hold hands and come together. I think we should have profound disagreements. But I think at the end of the day, I don't gain anything from doing the thing that bothers me, right? From saying, like, actually, I'm the good one and you're the bad one. I don't think that turning the tables or flipping the, whatever metaphor you want to mangle is useful.
You mentioned intermarriage, and you spend time on it in the book in a really interesting way. And I don't have to enumerate the anxiety of intermarriage that has existed in the Jewish community, particularly in institutional Jewish life. Can you just give us kind of what would you say is sort of a fresh lens on this in your book? Because I do think that it is different. How is this a different treatment of the anxiety of essentially losing Jews through intermarriage?
Yes. Okay. So intermarriage comes up throughout the book because it comes out throughout Jewish American history, and I think that people are concerned about it through the last 100 years, have been concerned about it for its own sake, and also as sort of a stand-in for broader fears about assimilation and acculturation and Jewish distinctiveness. I would say that this treatment is different in that I want to put this in a I don't mean to disrespect anybody who's still having a hard time with this, but as I say, the debate has sort of been settled by the vast majority of American Jews, or at least the majority of American Jews. Most younger American Jews are themselves in intermarriages, and most of those people are still, or at least many of those people are still still call themselves Jewish and still raising Jewish.
I just want to make sure people understood that you're saying the facts on the ground have essentially settled the matter.
Yeah, absolutely, exactly. Like this is not.
There's such a high percentage.
This is maybe still
right. Choosing
this is maybe
and
still a debate.
Still choosing to raise their kids with Jewish.
Right.
With Jewish
exactly.
Family.
This is maybe still a debate at the institutional level, but in life, it's not a debate anymore. There may be people who say, I think intermarriage is really wrong. And in fact, somebody did say this to me. She said she thought it was the worst thing you could do, which was hurtful to hear. But at the end of the day, like I hung up that call and returned to my Jewish life, and know that it's not, that it doesn't mean that I don't love being Jewish, or that I don't want to have a Jewish family, or that I don't participate in Jewish life. I think there has been a tendency in some corners of institutional Jewishness to say we just need to double down, right? We just need to tell people that no, it's really important that they don't intermarry. And I think that what we've seen is that that's not worked. And so what you can do now, if you're in one of those spaces, is to acknowledge that this is what's happening and try to make people feel welcome, and see it as an opportunity for people to re-explore their Jewishness, to become more conscious about how they engage with it, or risk losing those people who will go elsewhere. And the elsewhere will also be Jewish spaces. I want to make that clear, right? It's not necessarily that they will give up on Judaism and Jewishness, but they may not be doing it with you.
Jews and money. I know it's a very tricky territory, and I heard in one interview acknowledge just how sensitive this area is. So how did you approach it and still decide to cover it?
Yes. So there's a chapter in the book called Laboring Jews, which is about Jews and the labor movement and Jews in poverty and Jewish philanthropy, but it is also about Jews in finance, which has been a major part of American Jewish history. And so to not write about it would seem disingenuous. On the other hand, as you say, I was very uncomfortable writing about it because of anti-Semitism, because we are in this moment where people feel so afraid. But ultimately, firstly, while I don't mean this to say that we should all just do whatever and that there aren't consequences for behavior, but ultimately, anti-Semites' perception of Jews are not really dictated by what we say and do. They're dictated by their own conspiracies and hatred. And so pretending that if I just write certain things, they'll leave us alone, I think is a bit naive. And also, the point of this book is not that when I say that, there's no such thing as a bad Jew, it doesn't mean that there aren't people who I think have done horrible things or have been bad people. And there's an interview I did that comes up at the start of the book where I say, well, Jews aren't victims or villains. And the interviewee said, no, I think that Jews are victims and villains. In other words, that there have been some really wonderful things that American Jews have done and some completely horrible things that American Jews have done. If you look at somebody like Bernie Madoff, who used I don't mean this in like a cabal way, Jewish networks, connections to other Jewish people in order to take real advantage of them and hurt Jewish institutions and Jewish individuals, like that is a part of American Jewish history. And it doesn't, to pretend that doesn't exist, I don't think it's not just that it's not honest, it's not fair to the richness of the American Jewish story. It includes, major advances in pushing for labor rights. And it also includes Bernie Madoff. And it was important to me to have both of those narratives sit next to each other in this book.
We are talking at a moment of heightened anti-Semitism. I think that's pretty much unimpeachable and disturbing. And I just wonder, as I was reading your book, just this feels like it speaks to something that's happening in terms of how Jews are kind of dealing with it. How do you, through the lens of your book, kind of respond to the rhetoric right now, and whether we are internalizing or not internalizing, how Jews are responding to what we see as a more naked kind of stereotyping and, frankly, even uglier?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. One thing that has been clear to me, though, is that although most Jews feel that anti-Semitism is rising, we don't necessarily agree on what that means or looks like, and we don't necessarily agree on what to do about it. And so this division that we have in terms of, what does it mean to be Jewish, also comes up in what does it mean to feel uncomfortable or unsafe as a Jew in America, which is, which is hard. And I think one of the things that I have said in other interviews about this book is that even, somebody doesn't have to agree with me for me to understand that they can be the victim of anti-Semitism and for me to speak up and try to defend that person. The other thing that I will say is that I think in this moment right now, and if you look at American Jewish history, this has been true before, that not all, but a lot of anti-Semitism does work in concert with other hatreds. So be that anti-Black racism or xenophobia or homophobia or, and so on and so forth. And I think it's important that even in this conversation where we talk about Jewish distinctiveness and Jewish institutions and so on and so forth, that we don't try to fight anti-Semitism alone. And I say that not to downplay anti-Semitism, which is real and which is terrifying, but because I think that fighting this back has historically required and will require solidarity.
You write in your introduction that there's a debate over who gets to speak for American Jews. Mm-hmm. I see that resonates with me, but how would you, for those who want to know kind of what you mean by that? Who's doing the debating?
I think it comes up, we have, it's at the institutional level. So you have, for example, your different, AIPAC and J Street both call themselves pro-Israel and mean that in two very different ways. You have the Anti-Defamation League, which is called upon often for the increasingly frequent, it seems, moments of anti-Semitism, but people who don't agree at all with how they handle it or what they, and from across the political spectrum, how they handle it or what they deem to be anti-Semitism. And then you have, you have just on the non-institutional, but on the personal level, there's who gets access to these, to the megaphones, right? So who's invited to the White House? Who do the Nets call? Who, when they're dealing with Kyrie Irving? Who gets to be in the room? And
Nets means networks for those of us who are over 50.
Oh no! I meant the Brooklyn Nets. Who do the Brooklyn Nets call up when they were trying to deal with their
team? Sorry, the team.
Exactly. No. So there's the sort of institutional, formal, political level, and then there's just the personal level. The cliche of two Jews, three opinions is a cliche for a reason, but it does mean, it does mean that at moments where we feel under threat, people are experiencing those threats very differently and will articulate that response differently. And on the one hand, there's the sort of the desire to rally and to speak together. But on the other hand, many of us do not want to be spoken for by certain other individuals. And that, I think, is one of the major tensions that we're seeing in American Jewish life today. And just one other question to raise, which is is there an American Jewish community? Or are there a series of American Jewish communities which are living with each other, but not necessarily together?
Israel has obviously become a very intense fault line around this and what people say about Jews and what Jews feel about their own Jewish state. You have a chapter called Zionist Jews. And I know I'm asking you to condense something very complicated, but can you just give us a little bit of a taste of that chapter? Of
Zionist Jews? So this is really about the establishment both of Israel and of and of Zionist politics in the United States. I think it's important to remember that in the early 20th century, American Jews were not all in on Zionism. They were afraid of the dual loyalty trope. But then we see with World War II, with anti-Semitism, which was at an all-time high during World War II, and after with the establishment of the State of Israel, and what that means for Palestinians, the birth of this political movement, or not birth, but the embrace of this political movement in America. And I would argue that from the beginning, you could sort of see the seeds of dissent that are much stronger now in American Jewish politics. So the chapter deals with the earlier part of the history, and then we follow the debates through American Jewish history up to and including the present. Great.
I want to end with your mom, because you say that was one of the most meaningful interviews you did. Just tell us a little bit about your mom and what was your takeaway from talking to her?
Yes. So my mother, as I mentioned, she was not raised Jewish. She converted after marrying my dad, but before I was born. And what I realized, and I will say, has not always been treated so nicely by various, at various moments of her life in different Jewish spaces, including by some people who really should have behaved differently, just on a human level. And so it was rewarding to me to hear, I hope I don't get emotional saying this, but that what she was trying to give us was a foundation that we could do with what we will, that she saw Judaism as this wonderful moral foundation, and that she wanted to give us enough to sort of decide what it would be in each of our lives. And having written this book, I can see that she did it, right? That sort of this very lofty and at the same time, for a variety of reasons, sort of challenging goal was achieved and is being achieved. And it made me very proud of her and to be her daughter and to continue this Jewish tradition that she didn't just take on, but in my opinion, for our family at least, improved upon and made something whole and human. So that's the answer, my mom.
Thank you, Emily Tamkin. The book is called Bad Jews, A History of American Jewish Politics and Identities. It's an important book. It's a provocative one. I hope you will buy it and discuss it. Thank you for being with us on In the Spotlight. I look forward to seeing you next time. I'm Abigail Pogrebin.